The wheels of my chair rolled quietly across the smooth marble floor. The rhythmic sound seemed louder than the conversations swirling around me, almost as if the noise of the world had been muted. I stayed hidden in the shadows, tucked behind the towering palm trees in the hotel lobby. The evening air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and expensive champagne, felt suffocating. And then, I saw him. Brandon. He was laughing a loud, carefree laugh that once made my heart skip a beat. But tonight, it was like shards of glass scraping against my chest. He didn't see me. Of course, he didn't. He never even looked back. The woman standing next to him whispered something in his ear. He turned toward her, eyes glinting with the same affection he used to reserve for me, the same way he had kissed my neck so many times, pulling me close, wrapping me in his arms, promising me the world. But that world had vanished 3 years ago. The hospital bed, the wreck, the accident, everything I thought I knew about him, about us, shattered. But tonight, I had the upper hand. Tonight, he would feel the weight of every promise he'd broken, the weight of every insult he'd hurled at me, and he wouldn't even see it coming. I looked down at my chair, my custom chair. Not the hospital model he'd seen me in. This one was different. It was sleek, Italian leather, chrome, the kind of chair that cost more than his annual salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. A chair, an object of disability, of helplessness, was now my weapon, my armor, the tool that would take everything he had. You see, 3 years ago, I was a different person. I was the one lying in that hospital bed, unable to walk, crying in the dark because he'd left me. The woman he had promised to love, the woman he had swore to stay with, no matter what. And when it all fell apart, when the accident left me broken and he walked away, I was nothing. At least, that's what I believed. But now I wasn't helpless anymore. I had rebuilt myself. I had become someone he would never expect. And tonight, he was about to find out exactly who I had become. He was there, kissing her neck, unaware of my presence, unaware of the woman he had left behind. And I felt something inside me crack, something deep, something primal, the rage that had been simmering for 3 long years, that had consumed my every thought, my every plan, was finally ready to boil over. I sent him a text earlier today, simple, to the point. Meet me in the penthouse suite at midnight. Come alone. He had replied almost instantly. Who is this? But I knew his curiosity would get the best of him. It always did. It was his fatal flaw. The need to know. The need to control. The need to make every situation work in his favor. That need, that arrogance, had been his downfall before. And tonight, it would be his destruction. The elevator doors opened, and I saw them, his arm wrapped around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. They made their way toward the lift, oblivious, just like he had been the day he walked out of my life. I rolled my chair back, slowly, carefully, retreating into the shadows. I wasn't going to confront him yet. No, I had a plan. I had been writing it for years. Every detail, every move, had been carefully thought out, carefully orchestrated. He wouldn't see it coming. The sound of the elevator dinged, and they stepped inside, the doors sliding shut behind them. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had waited 3 years for this moment. 1 more minute wasn't going to kill me. I pushed myself to the side, positioning myself just behind the tall, ornate column. I wanted to hear everything. I wanted to know what he would say when he walked into that suite. What would his face look like when he saw me there, this woman he had abandoned? What would he feel when he realized that I had become the very thing he thought I couldn't be? I could hear the soft murmur of voices, growing quieter as the elevator ascended. It was almost time. I glanced at my phone. 10 minutes until midnight. Suddenly, I felt the weight of the room shift, the air thickening with anticipation. Everything had been building toward this moment. I couldn't back out now. I wheeled my chair forward, making sure every step was deliberate. The soft sound of my chair's wheels on the floor was like music to my ears. This was the moment I'd been planning for so long. I approached the penthouse suite, the heavy door looming in front of me. It was time to face him. Time to face the man who had left me for someone else, who had thought I was weak. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I knocked. Who will open the door? What will Brandon's reaction be when he sees Audrey? Stay tuned for the next part of the story. The hotel room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. Audrey stood there, her back to the door, her mind racing as she gripped the cold handle of the penthouse suite. Her fingers tingled, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't the same woman who had been abandoned 3 years ago, but the ghosts of her past still haunted every inch of this place. The knock echoed through the quiet hallway, but Audrey didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. Every breath she took, every heartbeat in her chest, was calculated. Every movement calculated. The time for playing the weak, heartbroken woman was over. That version of herself was gone. She had become someone else, someone stronger. And tonight, she was about to take control. Audrey. The voice came from the other side of the door, familiar and foreign at once. It was Brandon. His voice was smooth, just like it had always been, charming, self-assured, unaware of the storm that was brewing behind that door. She could feel the tension in the air. Her heart pounded in her chest. But she wasn't going to back down. She had waited 3 long years for this. She had rebuilt her life from the wreckage he had left behind. And now, she was ready to make him pay. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back against the door and closed her eyes, feeling the coldness of the metal against her back, grounding herself. When she opened her eyes again, there was no trace of the fear she had once felt. The only thing she could focus on now was what needed to be done. Another knock. This time, louder. Audrey. Her lips curled into a small, cruel smile as she unlocked the door. As it swung open, Brandon's face appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide, his smile faltering as he looked at her. She could see the recognition in his eyes, the brief flicker of confusion. It wasn't the kind of reunion he had expected. Audrey, what the hell? His words trailed off as his gaze traveled over her, taking in the wheelchair, the way she held herself, the confidence radiating off of her. The same confidence she hadn't had 3 years ago, lying broken in that hospital bed, helpless, abandoned. "Come in," she said coolly, stepping aside to allow him to enter. "I think we need to talk." He hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of what to make of her sudden calm. Then, he stepped inside, his eyes darting around the penthouse suite. The room was nothing like the sterile, lifeless hospital room he had last seen her in. The curtains were drawn, the dim lighting giving the space an intimate, almost predatory feel. "What is this, Audrey?" His voice was still filled with disbelief, and for a moment, she almost felt a flicker of pity for him. But she quickly squashed it. Pity had no place in her world anymore. "This," she began, her tone calm but cutting, "is the result of your choices. The choices you made when you left me. The choices you made when you walked away from everything we had, from everything we could have had." Her words stung, but she didn't give him a chance to respond. She was on a roll now. She'd spent so long nursing the wounds, so long building up the fire inside her. Now, she was ready to let it burn. "Do you remember the day I woke up in that hospital? After the accident, Audrey asked, her eyes narrowing, her voice softening just a little as the memories surfaced. Do you remember the look on your face when you told me you couldn't stay? He opened his mouth to speak, but Audrey cut him off. No, don't. You don't get to apologize now. Her voice was cold, hard like the steel in her chair. You don't get to walk back in here and act like nothing happened, like I haven't spent 3 years rebuilding myself after you shattered everything. She could see the way he flinched at her words, the way his eyes shifted nervously. It was a look she hadn't seen in years. The vulnerability that he had hidden behind his bravado was starting to show. But Audrey wasn't about to feel sorry for him. Not anymore. You thought I would just lie there, she continued, her words slow, deliberate. You thought I would just fall apart and disappear. But here I am. You've never seen me like this before. You've never seen the woman you left behind. The woman who doesn't need you. Who never needed you. Her gaze never left his, watching as he began to shift uncomfortably under the weight of her words. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to handle the woman she had become. What do you want, Audrey? He finally asked, his voice weak, strained. It wasn't the question she had been expecting, but it was the question she needed to hear. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about his regrets or his guilt. It was about her. It was about what she had become and what she was about to do. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything, she said quietly, her voice filled with icy determination. I want you to feel the same emptiness I felt when I woke up to find you gone, when I realized that the man I loved had chosen someone else. She could feel her heart pounding, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. It was out of something else, something darker, something that burned in her chest and made her voice steady. And tonight, Brandon, she said, her lips curling into a cruel smile, you're going to get a taste of your own medicine. You're going to know exactly what it feels like to be left behind. Brandon's face went pale as he took a step back, his hand tightening around the door handle. What the hell do you mean by that? Before Audrey could answer, the door slammed shut behind him. What was she planning? How would her revenge unfold? Brandon stood in the middle of the luxurious penthouse suite, his hands trembling just slightly as they gripped the back of a chair. His face was pale now, his earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of Audrey's words. She had always been able to make him second-guess himself, but this was something else. He had no idea who this woman was. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes cold and calculating. She had the same eyes she had always had, the ones that had once melted his heart, but now they were sharp, like a predator waiting for its prey to make one wrong move. What do you mean by that? Audrey? His voice came out lower than intended, almost as if he were trying to convince himself more than her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow step forward, each motion deliberate, controlled. Her wheelchair rolled over the polished floors with a soft hiss, but it sounded like thunder in the silence between them. You really don't get it, do you? Audrey finally said, her voice soft, but her words were like daggers. You think this is some sort of reconciliation? That I'm here to forgive you? Brandon's jaw tightened. His eyes darted to the door, to the escape he knew was just a few feet away. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because deep down, he knew he could feel it, that he was trapped. There was no easy way out. I'm not here for closure, Audrey continued, the coldness in her tone creeping deeper. I'm not here to fix things. I'm here to show you what it feels like when someone you love abandons you, when they break every promise they made, and they think they can just walk away. The words hit him like a physical blow. It was too much, too real. But Audrey wasn't done. No, she had barely started. You left me, she said, her voice now rising with quiet rage. You walked away when I needed you most, when I couldn't even move my legs. You told me you couldn't stay. I was nothing to you. And the worst part, you thought I'd just roll over and accept it, that I'd crumble." Brandon swallowed, his throat dry, his mind racing for something, anything, to say to make her stop, to make her see how hard he'd tried to be there for her, at least at the beginning. But all those excuses were meaningless now. He wasn't the man she remembered, not anymore, and that terrified him. "So, tell me," Audrey said, cutting through his thoughts like a razor. "How does it feel to know you were right? I did crumble, but you didn't count on me coming back." There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating silence. Audrey's gaze was unwavering, a storm brewing in her eyes. She hadn't looked at him like this in years. But now, in the gleaming lights of this penthouse, everything had changed. Brandon's fingers clenched into fists at his sides. His stomach churned as he felt the weight of every mistake, every broken promise. He was suffocating, caught in the web of his own lies. But then, something inside him snapped. He had to regain control. He wasn't going to let this woman, this version of Audrey, intimidate him. "What do you want, Audrey?" His voice was sharper now, more insistent. "What the hell is this? Are you trying to make me feel guilty?" Her lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. "Guilty, no. I'm just reminding you of who you are, who you've always been, and who I used to be. The woman who let you walk all over her. The woman who let you think that abandoning her would have no consequences." The word consequences hung in the air like a warning. And for the first time since he'd walked into the suite, Brandon felt the first stirrings of real fear. His mind raced. What was she planning? This was all so calculated, too controlled. This wasn't some emotional outburst from a heartbroken woman. This was cold, calculated revenge. "You're not the woman I knew," Brandon muttered, almost to himself. "I don't even recognize you anymore." That was the truth, and it hurt more than he cared to admit. Audrey wasn't the fragile, broken girl he had left behind. She was someone else entirely, someone who had rebuilt herself from the ashes he had left behind. And now, standing before him, she wasn't just a woman seeking revenge. She was a force he couldn't control. Audrey watched him carefully, her eyes sharp as she took in his every movement. "Good," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You shouldn't recognize me. I'm not the same person who sat in that hospital room, begging for you to stay." Her fingers gently traced the armrest of her wheelchair, the smooth, expensive leather gleaming under the lights. "But you're still the same. Brandon, still the selfish, self-centered man who thinks he can get away with everything." Brandon's chest tightened. He wanted to snap at her, tell her she was wrong, tell her she was overreacting. But something in her gaze stopped him. She wasn't angry in the way he expected. No, this was something much deeper, something colder. A calm rage that burned in her eyes. But it was controlled, masterfully controlled. She was in control now. "You don't know what it's been like for me." Brandon tried again, his voice cracking slightly, the first signs of desperation creeping in. "I was there for you at first. I tried to help, but you pushed me away." But Audrey shook her head. Her expression was one of quiet fury, and the air between them felt like it was charged with static, just waiting to explode. "No, Brandon," she said, her voice a whisper of ice. "You didn't try to help me. You tried to save yourself. You thought you could walk away without facing the consequences, but you're wrong." And in that moment, Audrey stood up from her wheelchair, slowly, deliberately, as if she were daring him to look away. The slow, controlled movement sent a jolt of shock through him. She had spent so much time in that chair, and now she was rising, rising above him, above everything. As she stood, a sense of finality filled the room. "You're about to learn what it feels like to lose everything," Audrey said, her voice low, the promise of something darker hanging between her words. But before Brandon could speak, before he could even process what was happening, the door to the penthouse suite flew open behind him. He spun around, his heart in his throat. What the hell is going on in here? The voice, sharp, angry, came from none other than Shelley, the woman Brandon had left Audrey for. Shelley stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. What did she know? What was her role in all of this? The air in the penthouse was thick with tension. Brandon stood frozen, caught between his past and the woman he no longer recognized. Shelley, standing in the doorway, still looked like the picture-perfect girlfriend, blonde, flawless, wearing the same smile that had stolen Brandon away from Audrey in the first place. But now, Audrey could see it in her eyes, the flicker of uncertainty, of not fully understanding what was happening in front of her. She didn't know yet, but she would. "What's going on here?" Shelley's voice was sharp, demanding. She wasn't asking, she was demanding. Audrey's lips curled into a thin, controlled smile. She had no intention of letting Shelley or Brandon take control of this conversation anymore. "It's simple, really," Audrey said, her voice quiet, yet heavy with an underlying promise. "I've come to collect what's mine." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Brandon, still stunned by Audrey's sudden rise to power, couldn't find the words. His eyes flicked between Audrey and Shelley, his face pale, lips slightly parted as if he were trying to process a truth he wasn't ready to face. Shelley stepped into the room, her eyes scanning Audrey's wheelchair and then shifting to the woman now standing in front of her. There was no mistaking the disbelief that flashed across her face. "What the hell are you talking about?" Audrey Shelley asked, her tone tinged with both confusion and irritation. "You're making no sense." Audrey straightened up, the posture of a woman in control, a woman who had spent years gathering the pieces of herself that Brandon had shattered. And now she would make him feel it, every bit of the destruction he'd left in his wake. "You don't get it, do you?" Audrey said, tilting her head slightly as she looked at Shelley. "You think he picked you, but you're just the rebound, the replacement, the Band-Aid for the mess he created when he abandoned me. And now he's left holding the pieces of that broken promise. And so are you." Shelley's lips parted in shock, the truth starting to seep through, though it took her a moment to fully grasp it. She shifted her weight nervously, casting a quick glance at Brandon. But Audrey wasn't done. She wasn't even close. "Brandon thought I'd stay broken," Audrey continued, her gaze never leaving him. "He thought I'd disappear, fade into nothing. But instead, I've spent these years building myself up again, piece by piece. You think you are the answer, Shelley, that you're the woman he's been waiting for." Brandon flinched at her words. But Shelley, the perfect woman she thought herself to be, wasn't going to let Audrey take control of this. She tried to regain her footing. "I think you've lost your mind," Shelley shot back, her eyes narrowing, every inch of her posture defensive. "Brandon and I are together. That's the reality, Audrey. Maybe you should accept that." Audrey let out a small, almost pitying laugh, shaking her head slowly. "No, Shelley, you're not together. Not really. Not in the way you think. You're just part of his mess. Part of the illusion he created to cover up his guilt. He doesn't love you. He never did. He never loved me, either." Her words were like daggers, each one piercing through the false shell of confidence Shelley had built around herself. And she could see it now. The doubt creeping into Shelley's eyes. She was starting to crack, starting to realize she was part of something far more dangerous than she ever thought. Audrey turned her attention back to Brandon. He was still standing there, paralyzed, his face twisted in confusion, his mouth opening and closing as though he wanted to speak. But the words wouldn't come. That, too, was part of the plan. Audrey had known he would react this way. He had always been the man who thrived on control, on being the one with the upper hand. But now, he was the one who had lost it all, and Audrey was the one pulling the strings. You think you can walk into my life after 3 years and pick up where we left off? Audrey's voice rose slightly, the fury simmering beneath the surface. No, that's not how this works. Brandon, you don't get to decide when it's over. I do. Brandon opened his mouth, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. Audrey, look, Don't. Audrey cut him off, her voice sharp. Don't say another word. This isn't about you anymore. This is about what I've been through, what we have been through. You don't get to control me anymore. Her words were a slap to his face, and he recoiled as if the reality of what she was saying finally hit him. He was powerless now. His pride, his charm, none of it mattered. He had no idea how to fight back. Shelley, however, still couldn't fully understand what was happening. She had been on the outside, looking in at the wreckage of Audrey and Brandon's past. But she hadn't truly seen it. Not like Audrey did. Not like Audrey felt it. What is this really about? Audrey Shelley asked, her voice faltering slightly, realizing the true depth of what was going on. What do you want from him? Audrey's gaze locked onto her, and for the first time in years, Audrey felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't here to fight for a man's love. No, this was about something far greater. I want to make sure you both understand what happens when someone plays with someone else's heart, Audrey said, her voice cold, deliberate. I want to show you what it feels like to destroy someone, to tear them apart, and to think you can just walk away unscathed. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Shelley whispered, the realization dawning on her. She took a step back, her face blanching as she began to understand that Audrey was no longer just the woman they had discarded. She was the one in control. Brandon looked from Audrey to Shelley, his face a mask of confusion and fear. What is this, Audrey? What do you want? Audrey's lips curled into a smile that was all sharp edges. I want everything, she said softly. I want the truth, and I want you to know the cost of betrayal. As she spoke, the door to the suite clicked shut behind them. You're going to regret this, Brandon whispered, his voice strained, but it was too late. Audrey had already made her decision. She was done with him, done with everything he represented. Now, the only thing left to do was to make sure he learned his lesson. Before Audrey could say another word, there was a knock on the door. The person on the other side was no stranger. But could they be the ally Audrey had been waiting for, or the enemy she never saw coming? The knock on the door hung in the air like a warning, slicing through the tension that had filled the penthouse suite. Audrey stood still for a moment, her back straight, her eyes locked onto Brandon, who was now visibly sweating, his face pale. Shelley had already taken a few steps back, her mind racing to keep up with the rapid shifts in the room. Audrey didn't need to speak. She simply nodded toward the door. Go ahead, she said, her voice a smooth whisper of power. Brandon looked at the door, then at Audrey, his brow furrowed in confusion. Who's there? He asked, his voice tight, as if he were trying to hold on to any control he had left. But Audrey didn't answer him. She didn't need to. The game had already shifted, and this time, she was the one holding all the cards. Brandon took a hesitant step toward the door, his eyes still flicking back to Audrey, searching her face for any sign of what she was about to do next. She watched him closely, every nerve in her body focused on the moment he opened the door. The door creaked open slowly, and standing in the doorway was none other than Paul the cameraman, who had filmed their family gatherings for years. Audrey's old friend. But now, he was more than that. He had become an ally. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. His eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on Audrey with an expression that was both calculating and understanding. He had seen the aftermath of Brandon's betrayal firsthand, had witnessed the chaos it caused, and now he was here to help Audrey finish what she had started. "It's time," Audrey said, her voice cold, calm, as she turned her attention to Paul. Paul nodded, his expression serious. He had been a part of this plan from the beginning, and now the final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Audrey hadn't just come here to confront Brandon and Shelley. She had come to expose them for what they truly were. The people they thought they could manipulate. The people they thought they could hurt without consequence. Audrey was going to make sure that everyone knew the truth. "You think this is about some petty revenge, don't you?" Audrey said, her eyes never leaving Brandon. "But it's bigger than that. You've broken every boundary. You've broken every trust. And now, it's time for everyone to know who you really are." Brandon opened his mouth to protest, but Audrey cut him off. "No, Brandon, this time, you listen." She reached for her phone, which had been quietly resting on the table. With a deliberate motion, she turned it toward him. On the screen were screenshots of messages, photos, and video clips, proof of the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. "This is what you didn't want me to find. This is what you tried to hide from everyone. But not anymore," Audrey said, her voice steady, cold, like a blade cutting through the air. Brandon's eyes widened as he saw the evidence on the screen. His face turned a deeper shade of red as the realization hit him. There was no way out, no way to spin this, no way to explain his actions. "You've been so careful, haven't you?" Audrey continued, her voice quiet but filled with venom. "You've manipulated everyone around you, pretending to be the perfect man, the perfect partner. But you never counted on me. You never counted on the woman you left behind, one who would come back and expose you for who you really are." Paul stepped forward, pulling out a small USB drive from his pocket. He inserted it into the laptop on the desk, and, with a few clicks, the screen blinked to life, showing the same footage that Audrey had just displayed. It was a recording from one of the family gatherings, a moment that no one had ever expected to be caught on camera. Audrey's eyes never left Brandon's as she spoke again. "Here it is. The moment when you thought no one was watching. The moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." The footage played. It showed Brandon, in the middle of a heated conversation with Shelley, both of them laughing, unaware of the hidden camera recording them. "Brandon on video. She'll never be able to handle this. The accident was the best thing that happened to her. It got rid of all the dead weight." Audrey's hand tightened into a fist at her side. The words, the callousness, it was all there. The proof, the betrayal. "You thought I would never see this. You thought you could just walk away without anyone knowing the truth." Audrey's voice was ice. But inside, there was a fire burning. Every word she spoke was a reminder of everything he had taken from her, her dignity, her self-worth, and the love she had once given so freely. Brandon's face was frozen in shock, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. He had no defense. None. The damage was done. He had already lost, and he knew it. "This is what I've been planning for 3 years," Audrey continued, her voice low but filled with authority. "The lies, the manipulation, everything. It's all out in the open now. And there's nothing you can do to fix it." Paul stepped back, folding his arms as he watched the scene unfold. He had played his part, recording the moments when Brandon thought he was safe. Now, it was Audrey's turn to finish the job. "You want to know what it feels like to be completely exposed, to have every secret laid bare?" Audrey's voice was fierce, and the words stung more than anything else. Well, now you know. For a moment, everything was silent. Brandon stood motionless, the weight of his own actions crashing down on him. Shelley's eyes darted back and forth, unsure of what to do. She had been caught in the crossfire of Audrey's revenge, and now it was too late to turn back. Audrey's eyes never left Brandon. She could see the shame, the guilt, the realization that he had lost everything. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "You thought you could break me," Audrey said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now, I'm free. I'm finally free of you." And with that, she turned away, walking toward the window. Brandon made a move to speak, but no words came out. He was broken, and Audrey knew it. The power had shifted. Suddenly, the door to the suite crashed open, and a voice rang out from the hallway. "What the hell is going on in here?" Audrey turned, her heart skipping a beat. Who was it? Someone new. Someone unexpected. The voice that rang out from the doorway shattered the stillness in the room, sending a jolt of panic through Audrey's chest. For a split second, she wondered if the ground would swallow her whole. But no, she stood tall, her posture stiff with defiance, her face an expressionless mask. She had been preparing for this moment for far too long to let anything knock her off course now. The door to the penthouse was wide open, and standing in the frame, breathing heavily as though they had just rushed through the hallways, was none other than her mother, Eleanor. Audrey's heart stuttered in her chest, the air thickening. The last person she had expected to walk through that door, let alone at this exact moment, was her mother. And yet, there she was. "What the hell is going on in here?" Eleanor's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a hot knife. Her eyes darted between Audrey, Brandon, and Shelley, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. Her lips were pressed into a tight, unforgiving line, her gaze flicking back to Audrey with a mix of disbelief and judgment. Audrey didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She knew this moment was inevitable. Her mother would always come in at the last minute, as though she were some kind of savior, to clean up Audrey's mess, to take control, to remind her of her place in the family. It had always been like this. But this time, Audrey wasn't going to let it slide. She wasn't the same frightened little girl anymore, the one who had always sought her mother's approval. She was done with that version of herself, done with the woman who had abandoned her when she needed love the most. "What are you doing here?" Audrey's voice was calm, too calm. There was no fear in her words, only the quiet burn of anger and betrayal. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She simply stared at Audrey, her lips curling into an expression of disbelief, as though she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. The woman who had been nothing but a disappointment to her for years standing here, in control, unwavering. But Audrey could see the fear flickering in her mother's eyes. It was barely there, but it was enough for Audrey to catch. The realization that Audrey had done what no one ever thought she would. She had finally taken control of her own life, her own narrative. She wasn't the weak, broken woman Eleanor had tried to shape her into. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She was dressed impeccably, as always, perfectly pressed pants, a designer blouse, and her hair styled just so. She looked the same, as always, untouchable. But Audrey knew better. She knew exactly who this woman was. "Audrey, this is ridiculous. You don't know what you're doing." Eleanor's voice trembled just slightly, the tiniest crack in her usual calm demeanor. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Audrey didn't back down. She met her mother's eyes head on, refusing to let her control her anymore. "What I'm doing, Mom, is taking what's mine, what you and Dad, and Brandon, and all of them thought I would never get justice." Her words were sharp, cutting deep. Eleanor stiffened, her jaw tightening in anger. This isn't justice, Audrey. This is petty revenge. And it's beneath you. You've been manipulated, just like you always were. Audrey almost laughed. The audacity. Her mother, who had never once fought for her, was lecturing her about what was beneath her. About revenge. You don't get it, do you? Audrey's voice softened, but there was a weight behind her words. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. This is about showing Brandon and everyone else what they really are. The people who used me. The people who thought they could break me. And you think you've won. Eleanor's voice was low, almost pitying now, as if she had just realized that Audrey wasn't the same daughter she'd been trying to control for years. You're not a victim, Audrey. You're just throwing away everything. Don't you see this is going to destroy you, not him? Audrey's hands tightened into fists, but she didn't let her anger show. She knew exactly what her mother was trying to do, make her feel small, weak, and guilty. It had worked for years, but not anymore. No, Audrey said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. You don't get to tell me how this ends. I'm done being the victim. And I'm done being your disappointment. Eleanor's face hardened, but there was a flicker of something behind her cold exterior, something Audrey hadn't expected. Fear of losing control over her daughter, fear of losing the image of herself she had carefully crafted, a perfect image of a family that had always been in line, always in control. But Audrey had shattered that image, piece by piece, and now it was crumbling in front of her. Brandon, who had been standing off to the side, watching in stunned silence, suddenly took a step forward, his voice shaky but loud. Audrey, this is insane. You're losing yourself. You're throwing away everything we had. His words felt hollow, as if he was speaking through a fog, his desperation evident. But there was no sincerity left in his voice. The facade had cracked long ago. What we had, Audrey repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What we had was nothing. You left me when I needed you most. Brandon, you thought I would just crumble and disappear. But I didn't. I stood up for myself. Her eyes flicked briefly to Shelley, who was standing in the corner, arms crossed, looking unsure of what to do. And now, you're both here, trying to clean up your mess. Well, guess what? You can't, not this time. Audrey's gaze returned to Brandon, her eyes narrowing. You wanted to break me, Brandon. You did. But what you didn't count on was that I'd come back stronger. And I'm not going anywhere. Not until I've finished what I came here to do. And with that, she turned toward the window again, her back to them all. There was a deafening silence in the room. The storm was about to break. Before Audrey could even breathe, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Someone was coming, someone unexpected. But who was it, an ally? Or another enemy she had to face? The suspense hung heavy in the air. The silence in the room felt suffocating, pressing against Audrey's chest as she stood by the window. Her mind was sharp, focused, but the storm inside her was only just beginning to stir. She had done it. She had taken control. The manipulation, the lies, the betrayal, all of it laid bare before everyone. Brandon had been exposed, and so had Shelley. It was over. Or was it? A heavy knock echoed from the door, a stark contrast to the uneasy quiet that had settled in the room. The footsteps from earlier hadn't stopped. No, someone was outside. Someone else was coming. And this time, it wasn't just about her revenge. Audrey took one last glance at Brandon, whose face was a pale mask of guilt and disbelief. He couldn't understand. He hadn't yet grasped that she was no longer that vulnerable woman he could walk away from. No, she was different now, and no amount of regret or pleading would change what had already been set into motion. "What now?" Brandon finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "You've won, Audrey, but what do you want from me?" Audrey's gaze turned from him, focused entirely on the door. "What do I want?" she repeated softly, almost to herself. "I want you to feel the weight of every choice you made, to understand what it means to break someone down and leave them to rebuild, piece by piece, to never be able to go back to what you had." Her voice hardened, turning cold, but mostly, "I want you to remember this moment, and remember it every time you try to make someone feel small again." Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. There was nothing left to say. His pride, his arrogance, it was all gone. Audrey had taken everything from him, and she hadn't even raised a finger. It was his own decisions that had led him to this point. But just as Brandon was about to speak again, the door swung open. Audrey didn't flinch. She knew who it was before the person even stepped inside. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for the exact feeling it would stir inside her. Audrey came the familiar voice, deep, familiar, and entirely unexpected. Audrey turned slowly, her heart skipping a beat when she saw who had entered. Standing in the doorway, his figure framed by the dim lights of the hallway, was Jason, her ex-husband. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Her breath caught in her throat as the past rushed back in waves. The memories of their failed marriage, the late nights she spent worrying about his infidelity, and the final crushing realization that he didn't love her enough to stay. But now, there he was looking just as he had when they first met, but different, older, wiser, maybe. "Jason." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't care. She wasn't that broken woman anymore. Jason stepped into the room, looking around at the faces gathered in the penthouse. He took in the tension, the evidence of the emotional war that had just played out between them. And then his eyes locked onto Audrey. For a brief second, there was a flicker of something regretful. "I didn't know where else to go." Jason's voice was low, heavy with meaning. He looked at Brandon, then at Shelley, then back at Audrey. "I've been keeping tabs on you, on everything. And You what?" Audrey's voice rang out with disbelief. Her hands clenched into fists, but she refused to let her anger show. "Not this time." Jason took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been watching you. I've seen what you've become, Audrey. I've seen the strength in you, and I couldn't stay away anymore. I had to see you." For the first time since he'd entered, Audrey's gaze softened just the smallest amount. But it didn't last. She didn't need his pity. She didn't need him to tell her how strong she was. What she needed was something else, something Jason couldn't give her. "You think you can just walk in and pick up the pieces of our past?" Audrey's voice turned cold, colder than it had been with anyone else in the room. "You had your chance, Jason, and you blew it. You were the one who abandoned me, who left me when I needed you. I don't need you to rescue me." Jason flinched at her words. "I'm not here to rescue you, Audrey. I'm here because I realize now that I was wrong. I thought I could move on and forget about you, but I can't. I've tried, and now." He didn't finish his sentence. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the city outside the window. Audrey took a deep breath. She wasn't the same woman he had walked away from, the one who clung to the hope of a marriage that was already broken. No, she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, without him. But hearing his voice again, after all this time, made something inside her shift just for a second. "Jason, this isn't about you anymore," Audrey said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about me. It's about taking back what you took from me. It's about making sure I never have to rely on anyone like I did before. Not you, not Brandon, not anyone. Jason looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, Audrey could see the man she had once married. Not the liar, not the cheater, but the man who had once loved her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, his eyes filled with regret, as though he understood that no words could fix the past. The silence that followed was deafening. Audrey knew this moment, this final encounter, was the last one. She had nothing left to prove to Jason, nothing left to fix. It was over. So what now? Brandon finally spoke, his voice shaky. You've exposed me, made me a fool in front of everyone. What do you want me to do now, Audrey? Audrey turned to him, her expression unwavering. You want to know what you can do now? Brandon, she asked, her voice soft. Live with your choices. Live with the man you've become. Because that's the real punishment, living with who you are, and knowing you can never undo the damage. She turned back to Jason one last time, her face softening only briefly. Goodbye, Jason. And then, without another word, Audrey wheeled herself toward the door. The moment had come. She had won. And it wasn't just the revenge she had wanted. It was the freedom. The freedom to live her life on her own terms, without fear, without regret. As she stepped out of the penthouse, into the cool night air, Audrey felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. As Audrey rolled down the hallway, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her eyes scanning the message. Her heart skipped a beat when she read it. I have something you need to see. It's about Brandon. You won't believe what he's been hiding. Who was it from? And what did they know about Brandon's past that would change everything? Stay tuned for the final twist in the story, where Audrey's path to freedom takes an unexpected turn. Story 2. I remember the first time I felt truly afraid in my own home. My name is Anna Carter. I'm 35 years old, and for years, I thought I had the perfect life. A loving husband, a beautiful home, a respectable job. But I was wrong. All of it. Every single piece of that perfect facade was a lie. My husband, Alexander. He didn't love me. He never did. And his mother, Eleanor. She hated me long before I even knew what was happening. I should have known something was wrong the moment he handed me that cup of coffee, the one with the faint, sweet-smelling undertone that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just any coffee. It smelled like almonds, but not the good kind. No, this smell was sharp, chemical, almost metallic. I froze. This wasn't my first time sensing something off. You see, 3 months ago, I had been rushed to the hospital, diagnosed with what they said was severe food poisoning. The doctors couldn't explain the symptoms: the violent vomiting, the intense pain. But I knew something wasn't right. Something I couldn't see was poisoning me. Slowly, surely, I had become the target. And now, here I was, at the kitchen table, staring into the cup Alexander had handed me with that smile of his. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was all too familiar. This was a game to him, a twisted game, and I was his pawn. As I sat there, holding that coffee cup, my thoughts raced. Was this the final move? Was this how it was going to end for me? I glanced at his face, and for a brief moment, I saw the anxiety in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was waiting for me to drink, waiting for me to drop dead. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. That's when I made the decision, the one that would change everything. It wasn't enough to just survive. No, I was going to make them pay. Alexander, Eleanor, I was going to expose their lies, their cruelty. I had to be smart, calculated. Every move would have to be perfect. And I had a plan. But first, I needed to test something. I glanced at Eleanor, sitting across from me at the table. Her thin lips were pursed in that ever-present disapproval, her eyes cold as she watched me. She had been living with us for 6 months, ever since her accident, that conveniently left her with a broken hip and a reason to move in and watch my every move. I had never felt more trapped. But this was my chance. The cup in front of me wasn't just for me, it was for her too. It was time to turn the tables. I took a deep breath and set the cup down, pretending to adjust my napkin. It was subtle, but just enough. I had switched our cups. Eleanor's coffee, the one I knew was safe, was now in front of me, and the one I had smelled, it was hers. She hadn't even noticed. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. Alexander didn't know yet. He was still watching me, waiting for me to drink, to fall for his trap. But he wouldn't see it coming, not until it was too late. I smiled, pretending everything was normal, like I hadn't just orchestrated the first move in what would be the most dangerous game of my life. "Everything all right?" Alexander asked, his voice too bright. "Perfect," I said, lifting the cup. I let the steam curl around my face. It smelled like coffee. Nothing more, nothing less. Meanwhile, Eleanor, blissfully unaware, had already taken a long sip of the coffee I had prepared for her. This is delicious," she said, her face lighting up with delight. "What's your secret, Alexander?" I kept my eyes on her, watching closely. This was it. She was drinking it, slowly, cautiously. She took another sip, and then another. She didn't stop. She was drinking my poison. It wasn't long before the first signs began to show. Her hand trembled. She set the cup down with a sharp clatter, her face turning flushed. Her breathing became rapid, and then the words escaped her lips in a weak whisper. "I don't feel well." I could hardly contain the satisfaction swelling inside me. It was working. Her body trembled as she slumped slightly in her chair. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if trying to hold on to reality. The panic in Alexander's eyes grew, his face paling as he looked between me and his mother. "What's happening? What's wrong with you?" I asked, leaning forward with feigned concern. She tried to speak, but only managed a raspy breath. I feel hot, dizzy." She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion. I didn't flinch. I didn't move a muscle. This was all part of the plan. Mom Alexander's voice cracked, his hand reaching out to her. "How much did you drink?" "Most of it," Eleanor whispered. "Perfect." Her face contorted in pain as her body shook violently. And then she fell forward. Her chair toppled backward, her body hitting the floor with a thud. "No," Alexander screamed, dropping to his knees beside her. "You weren't supposed to drink that." I stood slowly, calmly, reaching for my phone. I dialed 911 with deliberate precision, my hands steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. "I'm calling 911, I said coolly. "Anna, wait!" Alexander's grip tightened on my arm, his voice desperate. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I understand perfectly." I pulled my arm away from his grasp, and in that moment, everything changed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. And I wasn't done yet. What happens when the police arrive? Will Alexander's secret come to light? Stay tuned to find out. The truth is, I always thought my family was normal. That's what we tell ourselves, right? That we're a part of something bigger, something real, and that the love we share is always genuine. When Alexander and I met, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, successful, and just enough of a gentleman to make my heart flutter. I mean, it wasn't love at first sight, but it was close enough, right? He had this way of making everything feel easy, like life had already handed him the perfect set of cards, and now he was handing them to me. He showed me the world, and for a while, I thought we were going to live our own version of the American dream: perfect house, perfect career, perfect family. But I was wrong. It wasn't just Alexander. It was Eleanor, too. My mother-in-law. She was everything I wasn't: polished, sophisticated, with just the right amount of ice in her veins. The kind of woman who never smiled unless she had to. And for a long time, I ignored the warning signs. I thought it was just me, being insecure, feeling out of place. I kept telling myself that once we were married, things would be different. But every visit to their house, every awkward family dinner, told me a different story. I wasn't just another daughter-in-law to Eleanor. I was an intruder. When Alexander and I moved into our house, it felt like the start of something new. The house was bigger than anything I'd ever lived in: new carpets, high ceilings, and windows that overlooked a quiet suburban street. It had everything we needed, or so I thought. But Eleanor, she never left. She didn't just visit. She moved in. The first time I realized something was wrong was the day Eleanor moved in after her so-called accident. It had been months since her fall, but she still walked with a limp. At least, that's what she wanted us to believe. That was her excuse to impose herself on us. Just for a few weeks, she said. "I'm just so tired. Alexander, I can't go back to that big house alone." I should have seen it. I should have realized. But like the fool I was, I welcomed her with open arms. I told myself, family takes care of family. After all, I didn't have my own family nearby. And it wasn't like she was a bad person, just distant, cold. But I had hoped that we could build a relationship, somehow. I mean, I wasn't exactly a stranger to family drama, but I didn't expect it to be so toxic. At first, it wasn't so bad. She kept to herself, mostly, but slowly, very slowly, I started to notice little things. Her cold stares, the way she would ask about everything. "Are you sure you want to buy that?" she'd ask. Examining the newest item in our home? Alexander doesn't like clutter. The more I tried to ignore it, the more I realized something was off. Alexander would come home, and he'd greet me with that same smile, the smile that made me feel like everything was okay, that we were building something together. But I knew. He wasn't just shutting me out. He was shutting me down. I remember the first time she really pushed me. I was in the kitchen, making dinner. I had spent the afternoon shopping for a special meal, something I knew Alexander would love. I was excited this was going to be our night. But then Eleanor stepped in. "Do you know that Alexander likes his meat well done?" she said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, her voice sharp. I froze. "Yes, I do," I said, keeping my voice steady. She didn't move, didn't blink. Well, I always find it odd when people can't appreciate the right way to cook a steak. The underlying insult was there, hanging in the air like a thick fog. She wasn't just talking about dinner. She was talking about me. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about the steak. It was about control. I wasn't going to let her control me, not anymore. There were moments, though, when it all seemed perfect again. Alexander would take me to dinner, just the two of us. He would tell me how much he loved me, how proud he was of everything we'd accomplished together. For a few hours, it felt like I was the center of his world. But then, we would go home, and I'd see it again. Eleanor's disapproving glance, the way she would call out his name when he wasn't looking, the quiet whisperings, the slow, deliberate undermining. It didn't help that I had become suspicious of Alexander. His distance was becoming more obvious every day. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. I had no reason to feel this way. He loved me, didn't he? But the more I looked at Eleanor, the more I felt like I was losing my place in my own life. I wasn't just battling her. I was battling the idea that I didn't belong. Then, one day, I found it. A receipt. A small slip of paper tucked inside Alexander's wallet. It looked innocent enough at first, just an invoice for a chemical supply company. But something about it didn't sit right. It didn't make sense. Alexander wasn't a chemist. He didn't run a lab. So why on earth would he need chemicals? I asked him about it that night, trying to stay calm, trying not to let my suspicions show. He laughed it off. It's nothing, Anna. Just some supplies for a photography project I've been working on. I'm thinking about starting a hobby, that's all. I should have believed him, but I didn't. I couldn't. The receipt didn't match. He wasn't being honest. And that's when I started to wonder, what exactly was he hiding? The tension between Alexander and me began to reach a boiling point. He wasn't the man I thought he was. And Eleanor. She was becoming more involved in our lives than ever before, making it clear that she was still in charge. Every conversation, every glance, every tiny comment was calculated to show me where I stood. But I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. I had to take control. For once, I was going to be the one who called the shots. I was going to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The only question was, how far was I willing to go? And when I finally found the answer, I knew everything was going to change, forever. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air for hours after Eleanor collapsed. But the real poison wasn't in the coffee. It was in the years of manipulation. The subtle digs. The whispers behind my back. I had been living with the poison for far too long. And now, I was about to make them all feel it. The moment I saw her crumple to the floor, I knew there was no turning back. Alexander was kneeling next to his mother, his face pale, his voice shaking as he screamed for help. But all I could do was sit back, calm and collected, pretending to be just another concerned wife. I could hear the sirens in the distance, growing louder. The sound should have felt reassuring, but instead, it made my heart race. What would happen now? Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for her chest. She was gasping for air, her lips turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. Alexander was still in a panic, but his eyes kept darting to me. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt. He knew, deep down, that he was responsible for what was happening to his mother. And maybe, just maybe, he understood that I knew it too. Anna, what did you do? His voice was a low growl, filled with venom and panic. You poisoned her, didn't you? I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I kept my gaze steady, as calm as I had been the entire evening. He was right. I had poisoned her, but not in the way he thought. I didn't do anything, I said, my voice deceptively soft. You did. He looked at me, confusion clouding his face. But before he could speak, the doorbell rang. The police were here. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked to the door. As I opened it, I saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the house. 2 officers stood at the threshold, their expressions serious. Ma'am, we've received a call about a medical emergency. Is everything all right? I didn't respond immediately. I simply stepped aside and motioned for them to enter. The officers walked past me, their boots heavy on the hardwood floors. Inside, Alexander was still kneeling by his mother, desperately trying to keep her conscious. But it was clear she was slipping away. One of the officers took a look around the room, his eyes landing on me. I could see the question in his gaze. What happened here? But before he could ask, I spoke. She's been poisoned, I said quietly. I'm afraid it's too late to save her. The officers exchanged a quick glance, then nodded. One of them moved toward Eleanor, while the other turned his attention to me. "Who did this?" he asked. His tone clipped but not unfriendly. I took a deep breath. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had finally taken control. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. "Her son," I said, my voice steady. "Alexander." The officer's eyebrows shot up, but before he could respond, Alexander stood abruptly, his face twisted with rage. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "My mother wasn't poisoned. She just collapsed." But his words fell on deaf ears. The officer stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, I need you to calm down." I watched Alexander's face contort with frustration, his hands clenching into fists. But there was no escape now. The web of lies he'd built over the years was starting to unravel, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. The officer turned back to me, his gaze sharper now. "Are you saying your husband poisoned his own mother?" I nodded slowly, my heart racing. "Yes," I said, not even flinching. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The officer glanced at his partner, then back to me. "And how do you know this?" "Because I've been living it," I replied. "I've been living with the lies, the manipulation. I've seen it all." The officer took a step back, and I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it, but I knew what I had to do. I had to make them see the truth. I had to make them understand that this wasn't just an accident. This was planned. I turned and walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling only slightly. I pulled open the drawer where I kept the receipts proof of Alexander's involvement. The chemical supply company invoice, the strange purchases, the subtle hints that had been building up for months. I pulled them all out, one by one, and handed them to the officer. "These," I said, my voice cold, "these are the receipts of the poison. This is what he's been doing. This is what he's been hiding." The officer scanned the papers quickly, his face growing more serious with each passing second. He looked back up at me, his expression now unreadable. "Are you saying your husband has been poisoning you, too?" I nodded. "Not just me, my whole life. First, it was me. Then it was my promotion at the firm. But now, it's Eleanor. He's been trying to get rid of everyone who stands in his way. His mother, his family, and me." The officer held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw the wheels turning in his head. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was something much darker, much more calculated. Then, without a word, he turned to his partner. "Call for backup. We need to take this seriously." I stepped back as the officers moved past me, heading toward Alexander, who was now visibly shaking. I knew what was coming next. The interrogation, the questions, the accusations. But none of it would matter. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I didn't need to say another word. The evidence was all around us. It was done. But as the officers closed in on Alexander, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if he wasn't the only one there? More to Alexander's plan than meets the eye. Who else is involved in this web of lies? Tune in next time to find out. The house felt colder now. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Everything was different. It wasn't just the silence that hung heavy between us. It was the weight of the lies, of the truth finally coming to light. As I stood in the kitchen, staring at the evidence in front of me, I could hear the distant sound of police officers questioning Alexander in the other room. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but all I could think about was the plan I was about to execute. Everything had led to this point, and now I had to be smart. I had to be calm. What happens next? That question kept ringing in my head. After everything I'd uncovered, the receipts, the phone records, the strange chemicals. It was clear. Alexander had been playing this game for a long time. But what if it wasn't just him? What if there was more to this? More people involved in this web of deceit? I shook the thought out of my head. Focus, Anna. Focus on what you need to do now. I reached for the stack of receipts I'd handed over to the police. The officer had been stunned by the evidence I provided, but the look on Alexander's face when I accused him, that was something I would never forget. It was the moment I knew for sure he didn't expect me to fight back. I needed to keep him guessing. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the texts between me and a few trusted people. My lawyer, a private investigator I'd hired months ago. They were my silent partners, the ones who had helped me piece together this puzzle. They didn't know the full extent of the plan, but they knew enough to cover my tracks when things went south. I had to make sure I was protected. No one could know everything. Not yet. I took a deep breath and looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. The police were still inside, going through the house with a fine-tooth comb. But I wasn't about to wait for them to get all the answers. I had my own. I reached for the hidden drawer in the kitchen, the one no one knew about, the one I'd set up long ago, just in case things went south. Inside, wrapped in a black cloth, were a few things I had kept hidden: notes, recordings, even the pictures Alexander had forgotten about. Proof of the affair he had been hiding for so long. Proof of his betrayal. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. These were the things he hadn't accounted for, the things I would use to destroy him. I walked to the front door, looking at the police cars parked outside, the flashing lights, the quiet murmurs of the officers. It felt like the world was closing in on me. But this was my moment, the final piece of the puzzle. I had already put everything into motion. I just needed to see it through. I stepped outside, making sure to lock the door behind me. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't flinch. I had spent too many years living under their control, being afraid of what might happen if I stood up for myself. No more. I was done being scared. I made my way down the driveway to the car. My hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. I was ready to take the next step. I knew I couldn't just expose Alexander and Eleanor. I needed to destroy the empire they had built. I needed to show them that I wasn't just some helpless wife. I was the one in control now. The moment I got into the car, I grabbed the small black notebook from my bag. Inside were the names of everyone who had been involved, everyone who had helped Alexander in his plan to control me, to push me to the edge. Everyone who had turned a blind eye, pretending like nothing was wrong. I had one goal now: make sure no one got away with this. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. I wasn't sure where I was going exactly, but I knew I had to meet someone who had been watching us for months, someone who had information I couldn't afford to ignore, my private investigator. He had been following Alexander for a long time, gathering information, checking the connections that linked him to everything, all the way back to the chemical supply company. I had to know exactly how deep this went. Was I just a pawn in this game? Or was there something worse, something bigger that I hadn't seen yet? My heart raced as I drove through the empty streets, the headlights cutting through the fog of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of uncovering something that would change everything. I had to keep my head on straight, focus on the facts, and make sure I had everything in place before I made my next move. "I've been following him," the investigator had said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Alexander's not as clean as you think. He's been in contact with a few people. Some you might know, some you won't. But there's something else, something more." I'd leaned forward, feeling the weight of his words in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. He'd glanced around before continuing. "The chemicals. They're just the tip of the iceberg." He's involved in something bigger. I'm still piecing it together. But there's money involved. A lot of money. And people, dangerous people. My stomach had turned at his words. What kind of people? He'd shaken his head. I don't know yet. But I'm digging. I'll keep you updated. As I turned the corner toward the meeting place, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The car behind me had been tailing me for the past 10 minutes, its headlights too bright in the rearview mirror. It was probably just coincidence. Or was it? Could someone else know what I was doing? I pushed the thought aside and focused on the road. But my gut told me something was off. Something was about to happen. And I needed to be ready. I pulled up to the familiar parking lot of the cafe where we were supposed to meet. I got out of the car, my body tense, every nerve on edge. As I approached the cafe, I saw him, my private investigator, sitting at the corner booth. His back was to me, but his posture was rigid. He was waiting for me. But there was someone else sitting with him. Who was the person with him? Was the private investigator part of the conspiracy? Or had I just walked into a trap? Stay tuned to find out. The air was thick with tension as I walked toward the cafe booth. The man I trusted, the one I thought was my ally, was sitting across from someone I never expected to see. I stopped in my tracks, just behind the table, my pulse quickening. There, sitting across from my private investigator, was my sister, Jennifer. The blood drained from my face as my legs went weak. What was she doing here? My mind raced, trying to piece this together. Jennifer had always been the perfect one, the one who played by the rules, who smiled and nodded at family gatherings, who always had a way of making everything seem normal. So why was she here, in the middle of this mess, sitting across from a man who had been helping me uncover the truth about Alexander? The investigator glanced up at me, his face unreadable. Jennifer didn't even look at me. She was too busy fidgeting with her phone, pretending like she hadn't seen me standing there. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. This was not how I had imagined this moment. I had expected to walk in, speak with the investigator, get the final pieces to the puzzle. But this was a curveball I wasn't prepared for. Anna, the investigator said, his voice calm but with a hint of caution. We need to talk. I didn't respond immediately. I was too busy trying to control the flood of emotions rising inside me. How could Jennifer be involved in this? My sister was part of the reason I had been so careful, so meticulous in my planning. She had been the one to help me all these years. She was the one I thought I could trust. But now, she was sitting here with the one man who had been digging up all of Alexander's secrets. Why? I took a slow, deliberate breath. I had to stay calm. I had a plan. I couldn't let Jennifer's presence throw me off course. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice a little tighter than I intended. Jennifer looked up at me finally, her eyes wide, but her face remained composed. I could ask you the same thing, she replied, her tone cool, almost too cool. But clearly this isn't just a casual meeting. I glared at her. Casual meeting? The nerve. The investigator pushed his chair back slightly, and Jennifer finally set her phone down, folding her hands on the table in front of her. Anna, she said softly, we need to talk about everything. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to hear it. Not now. Not from her, but I was too far in. If there was something going on here, I had to know. Talk about what I asked, taking a seat at the table, my eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. Jennifer hesitated, glancing at the investigator, who gave her a slight nod. That nod sent a chill down my spine. What was going on? Alexander's not the only one you should be worried about, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a slap. My mind raced as I tried to process what she had just said. Not the only one. Before I could ask her to clarify, the investigator leaned forward, his eyes dark with concern. There's something you need to understand. Anna, your sister's involvement isn't a coincidence. My heart pounded in my chest. My sister, involved in all this. The investigator paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. Jennifer's been working with us. Anna. She's been helping me collect information about Alexander for the past few months. We couldn't tell you. Not until we were sure. I could hardly breathe. Helping you. Helping us. My voice cracked with disbelief. How long has this been going on? Jennifer didn't speak right away. Her eyes dropped to her lap, and I could see the weight of guilt in the way she held herself. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. I never wanted you to find out this way, Anna. But we've been working together. He's dangerous, and we've been trying to get evidence to bring him down. But we needed you to trust us. We needed you to come to the truth yourself. I felt sick to my stomach. Trust them. The betrayal was almost too much to handle. My sister, who had been my ally all these years, had been working behind my back with the very man who had been digging into my family's secrets. They hadn't told me. They hadn't trusted me. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, my voice rising. Why keep me in the dark? Why was I the last to know? Jennifer stood up, her face a mixture of sadness and regret. Because you weren't ready, Anna. We didn't want to put you in danger. We thought, if you knew too much too soon, it might make you a target. Target? I scoffed, running a hand through my hair. I've been a target for years. You don't get to decide when I'm ready. I've been trying to fix this for months on my own. And you, I stopped myself, taking a deep breath. You should have told me. The investigator interjected, his voice firm. Anna, the situation is more complicated than you think. We didn't just want to protect you. We were protecting the whole family. My hands were trembling now. Protecting me, protecting the family. I looked between Jennifer and the investigator, struggling to process what they were telling me. My sister had been involved in this all along. She had helped gather the pieces, but she hadn't trusted me enough to share what she knew. You're right, I said, forcing the words out. I wasn't ready, but now, I need to know. What have you two been hiding from me? Jennifer took a slow, deliberate step forward. There's more to Alexander's plans than we initially thought. He's not just trying to get rid of you. He's trying to take everything. I stared at her, my mind racing. Take everything. Everything you've built. Everything you've worked for, she continued. And the worst part, he's already planning his next move. It's not just about the inheritance or the company. It's about power. I was reeling. This was it. I had spent all this time thinking that Alexander was my problem. But now, I realized that the true enemy wasn't just him. It was the entire web of lies. And my sister. She was just as tangled in it as I was. As I stood there, the weight of it all crashing down on me, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I needed to act, and fast. But the question remained. How far was Alexander willing to go to keep control? The sound of the door slamming behind me echoed in the empty hallway, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. My sister, Jennifer, had just dropped a bombshell. The truth I had fought so hard to uncover had just grown 10 times more complicated. I could still hear her voice ringing in my ears. Alexander's not just trying to get rid of you. He's trying to take everything. The weight of her words settled into my chest, making it harder to breathe. It was one thing to think my marriage had been a lie, but now, knowing that Alexander's plan was far more devious than I'd ever imagined, his goal wasn't just about me. He was trying to erase everything I had worked for. My career, my reputation, my future. I leaned against the door for a moment, my mind racing. What had I missed? What was I not seeing if he was truly after everything? Then there was no safe space left. No way to protect myself. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed the number I had been avoiding for days. My lawyer, Rachel. The one person who could help me navigate the mess I was now tangled in. Ring, ring. Hello, Rachel's voice was sharp, but familiar, the steady calmness of someone who had dealt with chaos for years. Rachel, I need help, I said, my voice shaking despite myself. It's worse than I thought. He's after everything. There was a brief pause on the other end. Rachel knew I wasn't the type to call unless I was certain. Anna, I need you to take a step back. Let's go through this slowly. What exactly did Jennifer say? I exhaled sharply. She's been working with a private investigator. She's been helping him gather information about Alexander for months. They didn't trust me enough to tell me. But they knew, Rachel. They knew everything about his plans. And they didn't want me to get involved until they had enough proof. Did they give you the proof? Rachel asked, her voice more serious now. Yes, I answered, grabbing the stack of documents from my kitchen counter. I have everything. Receipts, phone records, bank transaction. They've been working together. But Alexander? He's been pulling the strings all along. And now, I don't know who I can trust. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of her shuffling papers. Anna, I know you want to go after Alexander, and after what he's done to you. I get it, but you need to be careful. He's more dangerous than you think. And if he's targeting everything you've worked for, you can bet he's not playing fair. I know, I said, the gravity of her words hitting me. But I don't have a choice now. I have to go after him before he destroys everything. I hung up after a few more words, my mind spinning. I knew Rachel was right. I was playing with fire, and the fire was getting hotter with every second. I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I had been pushed too far, forced to endure too many betrayals. This wasn't just about protecting my marriage. It was about protecting myself, my identity, everything I had worked for. And Alexander was not going to get away with it. It had all come down to this Alexander's empire of lies, his manipulation, the strings he'd pulled to control everything. I couldn't believe how far he'd gone. The receipts, the strange purchases for chemicals, the messages that he'd tried to delete, but that I had found. The only question left now was, what was he planning next? I had to find out, and fast. I grabbed my keys and my phone, then headed out the door. I had never been inside this building before. It was sleek, modern, and cold just like him. I could feel the eyes on me as I walked through the lobby, the staff watching me with curiosity and caution. I didn't care. I had one mission: find the truth. I walked up to the receptionist, a young woman who barely looked up from her computer. I need to see Mr. Carter, I said, my voice firm. The receptionist paused and glanced at me, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Carter is busy right now. Can I take a message? I leaned forward slightly, my gaze never leaving hers. No, I'm not leaving until I speak with him. It's important. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. She didn't say much, just asked to speak to Alexander. After a few moments, she put the phone down and nodded. He'll see you, she said, sounding less than thrilled. I didn't bother thanking her as I turned toward the elevator. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every step felt like it was leading me deeper into a web I wasn't sure I could escape. But there was no turning back now. The door opened with a quiet swish, and I stepped inside. The room was everything you'd expect, sleek, polished, and utterly impersonal. A giant desk, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city, and the man himself, standing behind it. Anna, he said, his voice smooth but tight. What's this about? I took a deep breath, stepping closer, refusing to be intimidated. I know what you've been doing. Alexander, I know about the chemicals. I know about the plans. And I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've worked for. His eyes flickered for just a moment, but then he smiled that same cold smile. You have no idea what you're talking about. I slammed the documents onto his desk, letting the papers spread across it like a chaotic map of his secrets. I know everything, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. And I'm not leaving until you explain yourself. The room was dead silent, save for the soft hum of the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alexander stood behind his polished desk, his hands gripping the edge as if trying to keep himself from flying into a rage. The cold, practiced smile was still on his lips, but his eyes were different now, sharp, defensive, and terrified. I didn't flinch. I had come too far, fought too long, to back down now. I stared at him, the weight of the last few months pressing down on me like a heavy stone. Everything I had endured, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, was finally about to come to a head. It was no longer about Alexander and me. It was about power. It was about justice. And if I had to burn it all down to make sure he didn't get away with it, so be it. I know about the money, I said, my voice steady. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the deals you made with people who should never be involved in a family business. His eyes narrowed, his breath coming faster now, a sign that I was hitting close to home. He stood up straighter, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The walls had already started crumbling. Anna, he said slowly, as if testing the waters, you don't know what you're talking about. These are just business deals. You never cared about any of this, just about yourself. I smiled, cold and calculated. That's where you're wrong. Alexander, I do care. I care about the lies you've built your life on. I care about the people you've trampled over to keep your power. And I care about what you've done to this family. I could see it in his eyes now, the panic, the realization that this was no longer a game. He wasn't going to win this time. I had the upper hand. You're pathetic, I said, the words feeling more satisfying with each passing second. You've been lying to everyone, manipulating them, using them like pawns in your little game. But I'm done being your pawn. He lunged forward, his hands slamming onto the desk, his face twisted with fury. You don't know anything. You think you can bring me down with a few pieces of paper? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I stood my ground. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid. I don't need to bring you down. Alexander, you're already falling. The only thing left is watching it happen. I moved forward, pulling the stack of documents from my bag. These aren't just pieces of paper, Alexander. They're your future, your downfall, your empire of lies. I threw the papers onto his desk. His eyes flicked over them quickly, scanning the incriminating evidence: bank transfers, emails, contracts. His face paled as he realized just how much I knew. His fingers twitched, but he didn't reach for the papers. Instead, he glared at me, his voice low and dangerous. You think this is over? You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. I think I've seen enough to know that you're nothing but a coward. I turned to leave, but then I stopped. I couldn't help it. I had to ask, do you even feel guilty, Alexander? I turned back to face him. Do you feel anything at all for what you've done? To me, to our family? He didn't answer. His face remained a mask of anger. But I saw it a flicker of something deeper, something darker, fear. I turned to leave again. But this time, I didn't stop. I walked out of his office with my head held high. I had won. He had lost. And no matter how much he tried to fight it, I knew I had him cornered. I couldn't stop the smile that crept onto my face as I drove away from Alexander's office. It wasn't a smile of triumph, not yet, but it was the first time in months that I felt like I had taken control of my life. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I had the upper hand. The pieces were falling into place. As I turned the corner, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A black SUV, parked across the street, its headlights on, watching me. Were they following me? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My pulse quickened as I turned another corner, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The car followed, its lights too bright in my rearview mirror. But I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. I pulled into a parking lot, cut the engine, and stepped out of the car, my heart pounding. I moved quickly, quietly, toward the back of a building, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. But before I could make it to the door, a figure emerged from the shadows. Anna. I froze. It was Jennifer. She stepped into the dim light, her face drawn, her eyes wide with fear. "I had to talk to you," she said, her voice shaking. "I know what you think, but please, just listen." Before she could say another word, a sharp noise cut through the night, a gunshot. Was Jennifer involved in this? Or was she just another pawn in Alexander's game? Who shot that gun, and why? Stay tuned to find out in the shocking conclusion.